Okay, let's be honest, independent of whatever discipline we teach, most of us become teachers because on some level we actually believe we can help people become the best versions of themselves. But we also understand, if we're doing it right, that along the way our students help us become the best versions of ourselves too. James Morrison is one of those students for me. I remember the first time I saw him in a Zoom room for a class I was observing, and I thought, who's this skate punk kid who has so many smart things to say? And then later from my colleague, John Hales, I heard, hey, do you know this writer, James Morrison? His reputation preceded him. I knew of him before I knew him. And while James may be a skate punk, he's also an artist, maybe the Buddha, your best buddy, and a warrior who has the battle scars to prove it. James has lived enough lives to be the envy of cats. He also loves cats. He's been diagnosed and defined by a series of acronyms from GAD to OCD to AA, and now soon by 3 more letters, MFA.
Yeah.
He writes about his gloriously complicated life with courage, grace, and humor. When he first came into the MFA program after we lured him away from other schools, James was already writing and thinking at a pretty high level. He had kind of mastered the voice of humorous distance and essayistic reflection, writing hilarious stories about, among other things, his personal experience working at Trader Joe's that were tinged with humanity and shaped by deeper questions of work and class. I'd seen him read at a Rogue Festival event, and I could tell almost immediately that he had special talent as a writer. I could also tell that he had more places to go on the page, more adventures ahead. On some level, James is a mimic, a shapeshifter, and a trickster. He can write in any mode, any style, and do it well, using the different approaches to crack open some other window into his past. He can read a book, observe what the writer is doing, and then go out in his driveway, practice obsessively, and master the same technique. He writes like he skated, with dedication and discipline. He's branched out into more lyrical forms and styles while also dabbling in cultural critique, so much so that his thesis represents what I believe to be the beginnings of 3 full books. He's funny and fearless and one of the most generous and insightful workshop participants I've ever had in class. When he entered the program, James had never submitted his essays for publication and was frankly kind of afraid to do so, I think. That's a hard journey for most of us, typically marked by years-long collections of rejections. But nearly everything that he's submitted has been picked up almost immediately by respected literary magazines, including the arts and culture behemoth Slate. James and his essay, One More Day, were also featured on Slate's massively popular podcast, Death, Sex, and Money, where he spent an hour politely parrying the host's efforts to get him to give her parenting advice, while deftly and humanely making an argument for a safe, legal, and regulated drug supply. And all of this, the essay, the publication, the podcast, all came because James saw a billboard in Fresno and couldn't stop thinking about it. James has so much game right now, I'm not sure we're ready for whatever he does next. Recently, he just started messing around with his new iPad and trying some graphic memoir pieces. He has no formal training in art. The first piece he composed, all about the acronyms that have been used to define his life, blew away our workshop this semester and was accepted by the magazine Diode maybe a week later. Brenna and I were texting excitedly back and forth about the news, and we both said something like, he's gonna think this is how it always goes. And so I've decided to start sending him form rejection letters for fictional magazines, just to keep you humble. But the truth is that James is the kind of writer for whom hard-earned success will come, if not easy, then at least naturally and inevitably. It has been one of the true honors and joys of my career to work with him. Please join me in welcoming the artist and writer and the 2025 MFA nominee for the Graduate Dean's Medal, James Morrison.
Holy shit. I better do good. Yeah, thanks, Stephen. It's amazing. Brenna, Benita, John, Jefferson, all the people in my cohort. This has been a amazing experience, to say the very least. Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of a trip to be up here. Tonight I am going to read that piece from Slate. It's Valentine's Day. I figured it'd be good to write about the crushing overdose death epidemic in America, because nothing says love like that. All right, this is called One More Day. Fentanyl kills. That's what the billboard says. That's all the billboard says. Fentanyl in a cold light blue kills in stark white against an all black background. Below is a woman on a gurney, treated with the same dead blue tones as the script above her. She's covered to her armpits in a sheet, arms at her sides, awaiting an autopsy. Anyone who's seen a cop drama in the past 30 years knows the image. When an opioid user overdoses, their lips turn a cold, light blue. That was the color of my lips when I lay slumped in a pile outside the automatic doors of an emergency room. Jenny, the girl I had absconded from rehab with just days before, shouted for help, and once she saw the staff stir to action, jumped back in the car. Gustavo stepped on the gas, bald tires, searching for traction before squealing to life, catapulting them into a night drowning in coastal fog. I imagined the diffused light from cherry red plastic growing faint, the emergency dissolving in their rear view. I'm sure it was traumatic for them. I'm sure they went back to our wretched motel room and immediately got high to blunt the terror. That's what I would have done. Splashed across the bottom right-hand corner of the billboard are the insignia of several city agencies proudly supporting its message. What is noticeably absent is any reference to a single resource, not a website, not a phone number, not a mention of how someone might stop using fentanyl and thus avoid their impending death. The billboard looms large over a dirt lot dotted with tarps and tents and other telltale signs of DIY shelters in a southwest Fresno neighborhood where residents already know that fentanyl kills. They've lost all manner of kin. In addition to the billboard, there are several video spots that run on local television and YouTube. A daughter dies on the floor of her parents' bathroom. A father sobs over the loss of his precious teenage son, collapsing into the arms of his wife and remaining children. Donnie, a friend of mine, died in a sober living house he once helped manage. I hadn't seen him in more than a year, but he was there for me when I was newly sober. He invited me to a gathering of young, sober men where they discussed the novel challenges facing them in the foreign land of abstinence. It turns out the group wasn't for me, didn't feel super comfortable talking about MMA and motorcycles, but I did appreciate the gesture. And we remained friends, chatting frequently outside meetings about skateboarding and getting locked up and being alive after almost being dead. A year later, when I learned he had overdosed, it stung in a way I wasn't prepared for. Donnie and I were very different, and we were the same. The thought that he wouldn't get another chance, not one more day, was devastating. The billboard ad campaign is one of many tied to California's $1 billion spending spree that is in part aimed at raising, quote, fentanyl awareness. In a local news interview, the Fresno superintendent of schools, who was charged with research and development for the project, seemed very pleased with himself. He wore the satisfied expression of a do-gooder doing good. He was proud of the message, touting his decision to ask local high schoolers for input, claiming that they had provided valuable information to help them target at-risk youth. In my experience, any teenager willing to work on an anti-drug campaign likely has no idea what at-risk youth need. They are not at risk. Those at risk are not staying after school to brainstorm about which version of just say no is most potent. They're off getting high somewhere. Many studies have been conducted on the effectiveness of fear-based abstinence programming like DARE, and the results are in. Fear does not reduce risky behavior in young people. Whether it's drinking, puffing, fucking, snorting, or shooting, those most likely to engage in this kind of behavior are generally not moved by the spooky presentation given by the people who preach abstinence. And yet here are these billboards, millions and millions of dollars worth of them, sprouting up to the satisfaction of the well-meaners and the grim recognition of people who have, at some point or another, looked likely to become one of their cautionary tales. They are grand totems of denial to what might really stop these losses. No one is ready for that. Every Friday at 10 a.m., my sixth grade class gathered in the cafeteria. The officer's uniform was tan and gold and blue with crisp creases. He gave us all workbooks and lots of free swag, pencils and bumper stickers, keychains. He taught us the deleterious effects of drug use, how one sip, puff, or sniff would ruin our lives forever. This all checked out given the speeches I was giving at home. My much older brother had started the emancipation process at 14 and subsequently went off to sip and snort and puff and play music and make art. Our mother cried about it openly and frequently, making me promise, which I did earnestly, never to engage in any of that kind of behavior. As such, I felt right at home in the DARE program, my hand constantly and confidently rocketing into the air with the answers to everything. My vehement support of abstinence earned me a gold medal made of bronze metal. At 12, I was the absolute best at not doing drugs. By 14, if I was handed a pill and told it would make me feel good or even just a little better, I swallowed it. I also smoked a ton of weed. I found it helped soothe many of the symptoms associated with the myriad mental health diagnoses I had received. But for my mother and the psychiatrist, the idea that I would self-medicate was intolerable. They didn't want me to self-medicate. They wanted me to follow the medication regimen they'd prescribed. And in no way am I knocking psychiatry. Psychiatric medication has been profoundly life-altering for me, but I had to find that out for myself years later. At 15, when I was handed all those diagnoses and the prescriptions that came with them, I felt powerless, forced to take what I perceived to be too many pills, Paxil and Seroquel and Zyprexa and Klonopin. That one's actually was fine. And Restoril and on. So in America, there are two broad categories that drugs fall under: sanctioned and unsanctioned. Those who use the sanctioned drugs exactly the way they are told to are, quote, taking care of themselves. Those who use the unsanctioned drugs or use sanctioned drugs in an unsanctioned fashion are weak and sick and need help. In the United States, current drug policy is meant to stop unsanctioned drugs from entering the country, punish those who sell them, and force unsanctioned drug users to quit, often steering them toward the sanctioned drugs instead. Because the supply of unsanctioned drugs is wholly unregulated, they often wind up doing much more damage than drugs made in laboratories with government oversight. And sanctioned drugs are simply far more expensive to procure and keep supplied. Many people who turn to fully unsanctioned drugs are trying to get relief for a whole lot cheaper than they can otherwise. Both sanctioned and unsanctioned drugs can and do ruin lives and lead to death. An obligatory rant about alcohol would typically come here because it is a sanctioned drug, as it should be, but it is also among the leading causes of preventable death in the United States. Yet it's unsanctioned drugs that usually capture the darker imagination of the public. Modern drug use epidemics that have real consequences for real people become entertainment, rife with sensationalized headlines that miss or misrepresent major aspects of what's happening, pretending to care about users while instead using their suffering to sell ads and supplement content for 24-hour news cycles. Current anti-drug legislation does something similar, with prosecutors across the nation dusting off laws created during the hysteria that accompanied the crack epidemic and retooling them for the current one. Teenagers with no intention of hurting anyone are being charged with murder for providing pills to their classmates. And that's not justice for any victim, that's a head on a pike, a warning to people who sell unsanctioned drugs. Statistics alone don't paint the full picture. When I read articles chock full of stats, I stop seeing people. I see numbers. I'm a person who does better with visuals. For instance, how wide, how deep would a grave need to be to accommodate the nearly 300,000, now 400,000, overdose victims for the past few years? I conjure images from pandemics and wars, dead upon dead upon dead. Where did they OD? At home, in a car, a bathroom, the airport, work? Donnie was on his bunk bed. Wherever it happened, they were individual people, each one a life. Fresno County decided they'd amalgamate them into one likeness, approximate them on a billboard, to remind those who don't need the reminder. Fentanyl kills. This is a lot longer. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but yeah, I just want to, in summation, say that this is obviously something I care about a lot, and there's a better way to do this, and we should all be thinking about. We should all be thinking about human beings who medicate themselves in a different way. So, thank you all for being here. Thank you for being part of, I don't know, this amazing experience.